Yeah, okay. So here's what we want to do. I want to explain the structure of the Shemona Perakim, specifically the first five Perakim. Give a little overview over here. You can learn the Shemona Perakim 10 times, and if you don't think about what he's like what the superstructure is, what's he putting together, what's he trying to do, then you miss his main point. And I'm saying that's really autobiographical because I haven't realized how much the Rambam is saying till I, even though I learned this Shemona Perakim numerous times, till I actually put it together and really understood the force of what he's aiming at in the first five Perakim. So let me give you a short overview of the first five Perakim. Hopefully you're familiar with it. Parak Aleph we've seen, where he talks about the fact that the soul has various faculties, but he insists at the end of the parak that ultimately the final form, the ultimate form of the nefesh is intellect. Okay, that's Parak Aleph. Parak Beis, he talks about here. Shilat has these nice titles. So he says, which aspects of the soul can have virtues or defects or deficiencies? So which parts of the soul we have to think about perfecting, and which parts are what they are, and we can't really do anything about it. And then Paragimel is the Choloye HaNefesh. You see here the various things that can go wrong with your soul. And Paragdalid is Refuas Chole HaNefesh, how to heal yourself or someone else, meaning really how to help someone on the path of perfecting his soul. And then we get to Parak Hey. Parak Hey is about using all the faculties of the soul for one end. Okay, so those are the five Perakim. Parak Aleph defines the soul and gives us a little bit of a tour of what comprises the soul. Parak Beis tells us which parts of the soul can have virtues or defects. Parak Gimel tells us what the illnesses of the soul can be. Parak Dalet tells us what to do about that. And Parak Hey then says, use all your soul for one end. So, and what's that one end? Let's read the beginning of Parak Hey. So he starts it by saying you should control or direct all the faculties of your soul according to reason. That's how he starts off. And then the next line he says, well, let's read that inside. Lefi hadas, you should act according to reason to control yourself in line with reason. As we said in the previous chapter. So you should control everything, you should direct everything according to reason, and you should make everything the end of everything that you do. There should only be one end, which is to know Hashem. So right away you see maybe a little bit of a tension because he starts off saying you should act according to reason. And then he says that everything you do should have one end, which is to know Hashem. Apparently those two are identical, which is what I'm going to explain to you today. To know Hashem, i.e., okay, Yidi Asai, fine. Nothing that you do should be for anything besides for this end. So now, why is everything building up to here? Everything in the last four Perakim is building up to this Perek, which ends lauding the divine wisdom, divine inspiration necessary for this great statement of Chazal in Masechtas Avos, Kol Ma'asecha Yu L'Shem Shamayim. And that's what the Rambam is marich in this Perek Hey, teaches you how everything you do, everything a person does, has the end of knowing Hashem. And this is directing all the faculties of the soul to one, according to one goal, and all the faculties of the soul are controlled by reason. So how does this develop in the first four Perakim? Because he starts off in Parak Aleph and says, man is unified. So first of all, you should know that when you're thinking about yourself, don't think of yourself as disparate things, as a few different things. Rather, you are one thing. And that one thing ultimately is wisdom or reason, as we discussed at length last week. We spoke a lot about that. And then Okay, so that's what you are. So you want to know what's a human being? A human being is reason. Now, from that, we could immediately really jump to Parakeh and say, well, if a human being is reason, that's what you are, then that's all you should be doing. Everything else is a distraction. Everything else is not perfecting yourself. Everything else that you might be doing is not realizing yourself. And that's the truth. That's the point I want to get. That's the point I want to explain today. Happens to be the intermediate chapters are necessary because if you're going to use all your faculties for reason, if you're going to subjugate everything about you to this greater goal, this greater identity, which is das, then you have to know, well, what are those other faculties? How do they participate in reason, and how might they not participate in reason, and what can I do with them? So these intermediate chapters, 2, 3, and 5, are sort of 2, 3, and 4 are there in order to take us from 1 to 5. So 5 follows from 1. Since in chapter 1 he says man is mind, man is reason, is intellect, follows from that everything that a person does should be for the purpose of developing that, perfecting that, because that's what a human being is. And that's what we're going to see in Parakeh, that you see right over here in the beginning, the first opening lines of Parakeh, the Rambam says 2 different things. He says you should do everything according to reason, and he says you should do everything to know Hashem. In Parakeh, we're going to see that Rambam makes it very clear that the knowledge of Hashem, which is the final goal of a human being, is ultimately simply the human being developing himself as a human being, perfecting yourself as a human being. And here's why, very simply why. Because since Hashem is the ultimate explanation or the ultimate reason for things, so if you start and you say, look at Parak Aleph in Shemona Perakim. Parak Aleph says that what you are is intellect. Okay, if you accept that that's your essence, that's your definition, then it follows from that you want to make sure to perfect your intellect, your understanding, as the Rambam says in the end of Parak Aleph, that a person who doesn't perfect his intellect is as if he's for naught, because he's missing the actualization of being a human being. Okay, so you want to be human, you want to perfect your intellect. Now, perfecting your intellect means what? We learned in Parak, and also in Parak Aleph, knowing those things that are unchanging, knowing the laws of things, knowing the reason for things, the explanation, why things are the way they are. And since the ultimate why is Hashem, he is the ultimate reason. So therefore, in order for a person to be an ultimate human being, which is an ultimate thinking, ultimate intellect, you have to know the ultimate reason. And that's what we're going to see in Parakeh, that the Rambam, when he talks about doing everything l'shem shamayim, it's very much not about serving Hashem, like doing Hashem a favor, but it's rather about perfecting yourself. In other words, to put it in a very stark way, let's say there wouldn't be a God. So the Rambam would say, okay, so perfecting yourself means to know everything but for God. But since there is a God, and he's the ultimate explanation, so therefore, if a human being would say, look, I'm a human being, I want to become an ultimate, I want to become everything that a human being is supposed to be. And we say, well, let's think about what is a human being. I mean, understand a human being is a thinker, is a reasoner, is someone who figures out reasons for things. And everything else about the human being is not so interesting. It's just serving that. So that means the person should use every part of him to serve his ability to be reasonable, to understand. Okay, so let's get to the end of understanding. What is the end of understanding? Now the Rambam says, well, the end of understanding is Hashem, because Hashem, if you really think deeply and you try to understand things and explain things, the ultimate explanation is Hashem. So this is not a religious, Parakeh is sort of not a religious, sort of quote unquote, not a religious exercise, it's actually a very selfish exercise, which is to make yourself into a full human being. And Hashem is the explanation of that. So you see where I'm going now. At the beginning of Parakeh, he says you should control yourself according to das, reason. And he says, what does it mean to control yourself according to reason? That the end of everything you do is asagas Hashem. Why is that reasonable? So someone might read this and say, well, you know what? Look, a person's supposed to be reasonable. And since hasagas Hashem is so important, it's reasonable to do everything, to sacrifice everything else for that goal. But that is not what the Rambam is saying. The Rambam is saying is that you should become the most reasonable you can, because that's what it means to be a human. And the most reasonable, the greatest reason, capital R, is Hashem. That is the ultimate reason. That is the ultimate understanding of things. Okay, if there's questions, we'll do the hands. I think will be a simon for questions. Otherwise, we'll keep going. So what the Rambam does in Perek Hey, okay, so everyone should stop thinking about Hashem as this thing that we worship and that has wills that we have to obey. Rambam does not think of that at all. We'll see very clearly in this Perek. It's really about Hashem as this idea, as a reason, as an explanation, which is the ultimate in explanation of everything. And therefore, if we are, as Rambam insists we are, reasonable things, that and not just that, we are reason, because that's our definition, remember? That is what defines us, that's what makes us what we are. Then we have to reach the ultimate in reason, the ultimate in thought, and the ultimate in thought is this idea that we call Hashem. So now when the Rambam in Perek Hey is marech beautifully about how everything you can do brings you to Das Hashem, so I want you to think about this Perek as not merely the Rambam is giving us a wonderful training, like he talks about this in the Deis as well. He says, you could eat so that you're healthy, and sometimes it's good to listen to music if you need it because you're depressed. So that the purpose of all that is so that you should be able to think. So you should be able to be masig Hashem, what is possible to know. So it's beautiful instruction, wonderful instruction for how to guide your life, and even a person has children, his purpose is so that they should know Hashem, and when you speak, there's a purpose in all your speech, etc., etc. But I think you have to understand this Perek that the Rambam is not merely giving us sage advice, although it's a lot of that. But it's more about, the Rambam is basically taking us through the design of the human being. He's saying now that we learned that the whole human being is one, and the whole essence of the human being is knowledge, is reason. So now I want you to say, now you have to look at the human being and you have to ask yourself a question. What is the design of the human being? Meaning to say, why does the human being have an urge to eat? Because eating is necessary for him to be healthy so that he can attain knowledge. Why does he have this urge? Why does he have that urge? So it's not only, the Rambam is not merely telling us how to live, but it's a culmination of the previous chapters where he's telling us, here, let's think about a human being and his perfection. And then let's realize that everything about the human being is there as subsumed as a part and serves as perfection. And here's how. So Kol Ma'aseh Yivulu Shem Shemayim is not just good advice, but it's actually necessary as a concept to justify this idea that really everything about the human is a human being is a reasoning machine. The human being is a reasoning machine. You have to explain how every aspect of being human, such as desire, such as happiness, such as music, whatever, is there to serve this essence. So that's what the Rambam is doing in this Perek, not merely giving us good advice. Okay, so if you look at Perek Hey, so the punchline of Perek Hey, the Rambam says, is Kol Ma'aseh Yivulu L'Shem Shemayim. He's really excited about this. Over here, he says that this statement, Kol Ma'aseh Yivulu L'Shem Shemayim, had to have been undoubtedly was said with divine aid, which is just so interesting. As Rabbi Yehuda Kielson pointed out, it's not obvious why this is such a wondrous statement. Rambam says that philosophers wrote books about this, and Chazal were able to contain all this idea in one statement. What's the big deal? Kol Ma'aseh L'Shem Shemayim, okay? But it's interesting why I'm so excited about it. I don't know. But so let's talk about this. So the punchline of this parak is do everything L'Shem Shemayim. And if you would ask, before we learn the Rambam deeply, most people, if you'd ask them, why should you do everything L'Shem Shemayim? So they would say, well, very simple, because there's nothing more important than doing Hashem's will, and we should listen to him, and so on and so forth. But the Rambam doesn't say that. He says, as I said, he actually says something very different than that. And that's because the Rambam teaches us that, let's say, he teaches us in the Moreh Nevuchim that Hashem doesn't have desires, Hashem doesn't have wills, Hashem doesn't need anything. So the only thing reasonable, the only thing that makes sense is to talk about what does it take for a person to develop himself, to truly be a full human being. And that's in fact what the Rambam stresses. In this parak, what the Rambam does is he takes this very quote unquote from statement, let's say, Kol Masechi L'Shem Shemayim, and he explains that we should do this for ourselves. And that's why. The reason why Kol Masechi should be L'Shem Shemayim is because that makes you into a human being. So for example, let's say there's a few places in the parak where he says this. He says if a person eats what he wants to eat because it's tasty and maybe unhealthy, then he's equal to an animal. And he's not acting as a human. It's not a human activity coming from being, by virtue of being a human. It's a human activity by virtue of the fact that he's an animal. Okay, this takes us back to Parak Aleph, that a human being might remain an animal if he doesn't perfect himself and become an intellect. So the problem with not eating l'shem shemayim in the Rambam's world is that you're not being human. And you have to think about this. It's good to really understand this. This is like very important to the Rambam. That reason is this amazing thing. It's a godly thing. We'll see, it's a very godly thing in the Rambam's world. And we can participate in reason to make us tzelem Elokim, what makes us to be in the image of God is that we have reason, as we'll see that a little later today. And that's what makes us a human being. In other words, that's what makes us what we are, as we learned in Parak Aleph. While if we ignore reason and we act based on our base instincts, then we are not acting according to that, to das, to reason. See over here, he says, "V'zehu poel lefi hadas." This is an action according to reason. If a person eats only healthy food, and that's what makes him different than other animals. If a person's boil whenever he wants, without considering the harm and the benefit, so he's acting as an animal, not as a human. So the Rambam's argument, why should a person do everything he does l'shem shemayim, is simply because he wants you to be human. To be human. So the whole challenge, essentially the whole challenge of all avodas Hashem, let's say, Rambam lays it out there in Parak Aleph. In the first chapter of the Shemona Perakim, where he tells us that to be a human being, you have to be intelligent and act reasonably. Everything follows from that. The whole challenge of what is a human being supposed to dedicate himself to and whether he will or will not achieve perfection is laid out there in Parak Aleph, where he says, you are one thing, and that one thing is reason. And from that follows all avodas Hashem. And Kol Ma'asechi L'Shem Shemayim means, okay, you want to be reasonable? I'll tell you where reason is going to get you. Reason eventually will take you to knowledge of Hashem, because that is the ultimate in understanding. Hashem is the ultimate reason, the ultimate in understanding. Hashem is the ultimate in understanding everything. And therefore, you are indeed so designed so that you can do whatever it takes to reach that. And that's what Kol Ma'asechi L'Shem Shemayim. So Kol Ma'asechi L'Shem Shemayim is the culmination of the explication of the nature of a human. It's not starting from Hashem and saying, look, wow, we discovered Hashem and he wants things from us and we have such a privilege to serve him. According to the Rambam, it's we discovered Hashem. In other words, we perfected our intellect, have perfected our reason by knowing the ultimate reason. And if you're going to be a human being, a smart human being, instead of wasting away your potential, this is what you're going to seek: is this breadth and this depth of knowledge, which culminates in Das Hashem. That's a question there, Moshe Mordechai. Go ahead. Make sure to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I just making sure. So Kol Ma'asechi L'Shem Shemayim isn't a level where your average person is at. It sounds like it's a level to attain. I mean, most people would just say Kol Ma'asechi L'Shem Shemayim means you should have kavanah that it's for Hashem's ratzon, as you were saying, for eating to be able to serve Hashem, v'chulu. But you're saying it's not even there. It's when you live a life of reason, then you eventually get there.
then you eventually get where?
To kol masech, to a level where you could possibly attain the kol masech L'Shem Shemayim.
I think that's correct. I think your characterization is correct. If you look over here, he says, know that this level is a very high level and only very few people can reach it, and it takes a lot of training. And I think you're making a very good point that that's not merely because it's a challenge to constantly be thinking of a loftier purpose, but rather because this is a culmination of developing yourself and your reason. And it's also, you see, what happens with reason is an interesting thing, that the more a person is reasonable, the more he becomes overpowered with reason, and the more he falls in love with reason in certain ways, and he really follows reason. So yeah, I think that's why it's a training. It's not something a person could just switch on. I think was that your point essentially? Yeah, that's very correct. So that's the stress in Parak Hey. Again, to sum it up in short, the proper activity of a human being, which would be to be a human being. If you remember, we discussed in Parak Aleph, just parenthetically, the proper activity of every being is to actualize its being. So a lion is supposed to be a lion, and a rabbit is supposed to be a rabbit, and a human being is supposed to be a human being. So what is it to be a human being? Well, a human being is a knower, or a reasoner, or an explicator, I said last week, which means to know what there is to know. And you know what Hashem is? Hashem is the ultimate in what there is to know. Okay, I want to briefly just comment on something that might sound a little strange. This takes some background in the Moreh Nevuchim. I don't want to go into it. I just want to point out here in this paragraph that we just looked at, where he says it's a very high level and it takes a lot of training to reach there. Then he says, if you have someone like this, I don't think he's less than the prophets. This is something we spoke about in the first couple of shurim, that what exactly means that a person is almost a prophet. But here he says the following. He says, what I mean to say is someone who directs all the faculties of his soul and makes their goal Hashem. So now he says something a little different. He says the goal of your actions is Hashem. Now, what does it mean your goal of your actions is Hashem? Or originally he was saying your goal of your actions is the knowledge of Hashem. But what we're going to see soon is that there's 2 points here, I think. Number one, Hashem is the ultimate purpose. Rambam says the Moreh Nevuchim, and this is an obscure idea. There is no purpose to anything but for Hashem himself. Okay? And number two, and this we're going to explore further, is that when a person becomes wise and reasonable, intelligent, he, in a certain sense, connects with Hashem, becomes godly. So when a person directs all his faculties by reason, he is making the goal Hashem. Why? Because Hashem, who is the ultimate tachlis of everything, Hashem is the goal of his action, because by becoming reasonable, he becomes divine. Okay, so let's hang on to this point, that a person himself becomes godly by being reasonable. This is what I want to explain. This is what I'm going to move on to now, about this idea that a person becomes godly. And about this point, about a person becoming godly, see how he says over here, this is further in Parak Hey of Shemona Perakim. He quotes Chazal that say you should know Hashem in all your actions. What does it mean to know Hashem? Says the Rambam, Koloimar, that's a pasuk. And Chazal say afilu b'dvar avera. We won't go into that now. The Rambam says, you know what it means to know Hashem? Shetosim lepoya lahu tachlis klape ha'emes. What does it mean to know Hashem? It means that the goal of your action should be directed towards the truth. So here the Rambam talks about, you know what it means to know Hashem? It means to know the truth, or to direct something towards the truth. Now, this is a different angle, because we're talking about Hashem, knowing Hashem, and knowing Hashem, he says, means to direct something towards the truth. But the reason for that is because the Rambam says in Nechus Tshuva, that avodah l'shma, very much related to this parak, that serving Hashem l'shma is to do the truth because it's true. Famous expression of the Rambam, oiseh ha'emes mepnei shehu emes. That's what it means to serve Hashem l'shma. This is Nechus Tshuva, parak Yud, halacha beis. to do the emes at Peshu emes. That is the highest avodah. That's avodah l'shma. Why is that the case? What does truth come into anything? Because as we've been discussing, and here you see the Rambam equates truth with knowing Hashem. And that's because of what we've been discussing, that Hashem is another way of saying the ultimate in explanations. And it turns out the ultimate explanation of everything is Mechuyev HaMetzias, something that must exist and is one and incorporeal, as the Rambam teaches us about Hashem. But the essence of Hashem is that he's the ultimate truth. The important thing about Hashem for us, in terms of how we're supposed to develop ourselves, is that he is the ultimate truth. And therefore, if we're going to develop our faculty of reason, which is to say, our association with truth, then everything we do should be directed towards the truth. So that's synonymous with saying directed towards Hashem. See, here the Rambam says, what does it mean to know Hashem in all your ways? To direct everything you do towards the truth. Now, I will say this: the Arabic word over here for truth is al-haq, whatever, which means truth in Arabic, but that's also used to mean Hashem. Hashem is sometimes called the true one. I think Sheila probably points this out. Right. He says you could translate this as Hashem, because in Arabic, the word the true is one of the words used for Hashem. So when the Rambam says, Bechol dorchecha de'ehu, know Hashem in everything you do, i.e., every action you take, the purpose should be towards the truth, or it might be supposed to translate it the true with a capital T, and it's a word he's using for Hashem, the true one. But that doesn't take away from the meaning, because why is the Rambam using the word? Why is Hashem over here calling Hashem the true one? Because the whole thrust of this chapter is that saying that you're serving Hashem and saying that the purpose of everything is serving Hashem is identical with saying I do everything because it's reasonable. Because Hashem is the ultimate being, the ultimate reason, the ultimate truth. Okay? Now what we're going to do is, I'm going to move on. We're going to stop this share, and I want to share with you I'm going to switch to some other screens from the Moreh Nevuchim, because what we're going to understand now, hold on, we're going to understand now some very deep ideas which probably can't be understood, certainly not on one foot, not so easy to understand them on 2 feet either. So what we'll do is we'll just take a little bit of a whirlwind tour over here without going too much into the idea. But what I want to show you is like this. I asserted earlier that the Rambam says in Parak that by doing everything we do, we make Hashem our goal. And I said, what does it mean we make Hashem our goal? Because the human being becomes divine. So I said the human being himself becomes godly. So I want to explain to you what that means. In other words, what I'm asserting is like this. There's a certain definition of Hashem as being intellect, which is there in the Moreh Nevuchim in numerous places. Okay, that Hashem is intellect. That's what Hashem is. The Rambam basically says that explicitly. I'll show you one place. But then follows from that significantly is that when we become intelligent, we are uniting with Hashem. So we can use these words like saying divine. We can say there's a certain unity we have with Hashem. And I'm going to caution one last time that all these things have to be understood well. So I can't explain them fully now. And I won't even partially, but whatever, maybe some haskalah to this idea that, and you see how this ties into everything we've been discussing till now, that a person is his seichel. That's what Rambam says in Parak Aleph. And the ultimate in seichel is knowledge of Hashem. And that's the goal. Hashem himself is the goal. And what I'm going to show you now is that makes the human being himself godly. Okay? Why? How does it make the human being godly? Because Hashem is seichel. That's what Hashem is. At least at the minimum, we'll show you a paragraph where the Rambam says the connection between a person and Hashem is seichel, but also alluding to this idea that Hashem is seichel. That's what he is. He is intellect. He's the ultimate reason. And the more you approach the ultimate reason, the more you are perfecting yourself, and the more you're making yourself similar to Hashem, which is a major avodah of Allah b'drachav. We're supposed to emulate Hashem. And we emulate Hashem, we become united with him through perfecting our seichel. And how is that unite with him? Because he is the ultimate reason, and therefore knowledge of him, which makes us more reasonable, makes us more divine. Does that make sense? Roughly? Well, I ask for the Barra. Okay. So I want to say Shemona Perakim because, like I said, it's such a deep idea, and the Rambam did an excellent job at hiding it, which he insists that he must do in the Moreh Nevuchim. By the way, the screen you're looking at is a parallel Hebrew and Arabic Moreh Nevuchim. The reason why I'm using this one is because it's a lot easier to read, and the translation's easier as well. This is the most recent translation done by the Mifal Mishnah Torah. It's an excellent job if you want to simplify the Moreh Nevuchim, which is not necessarily a good thing to do, but if you want it easiest read and breaks it down, and in the print edition they also have explanations, this is very highly recommended. So here the Rambam is like this. In Chelik Aleph Perek Aleph of the Moreh Nevuchim, he talks about what does the pasuk mean when it says Nase Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmuseinu. So he says people thought that Tselem means a shape. So they thought, okay, when it says we'll make a man in the shape of God, that means Hashem has a shape. So that made them believe that Hashem has a body, but that's not true. So what does the word Tselem mean? Tselem, says the Rama, means the natural form, i.e. that which makes something what it is, and its true essence. So what makes a human being what he is? We know that, right? That's the intellect. We learned that in Shemona Perakim Perek Aleph. The Rambam says the same thing in the Meirah. What is it about a human that makes him what he is? That's his ability to attain human attainment, which is thought. And due to that attainment, he's B'Tselem Elokim. So the word Tselem does not mean shape. God has no shape. It means form, the Greek word form. The Greek form means tsura. We call that in Middle Hebrew, that's called a tsura. And a tsura means, the form of the thing means that which makes it what it is. And what makes a human being what he is his intellect. And that's what the pasuk Tselem Elokim means. Now, if you put that all together, what the Rambam is saying is, what makes a human being what a human being is the same thing as what makes Hashem what Hashem is. So he seems to be saying, almost explicitly, that if you want to know what's the essence of Hashem, the answer is intellect. Now, reminder, we cannot understand Hashem. Well, why can't we understand Hashem? If Hashem is intellect, why is it so difficult to understand Hashem? That's something we're not going to talk about today. But the Rambam here indicates that the essence of what makes a human being a human is the same thing, that is the same essence that makes Hashem Elokim, and that is intellect. And that brings us back to what I was saying before in the Shemona Perakim, that the ultimate in humanness is knowing God, because God is the ultimate idea. That's what he is. He is thought. He is intellect. In this chapter, Chelik Aleph Perek Samach Aleph, Samach Ches, the Rambam says, you know how well known the statement that the philosophers said about God, which is that he is the seichel, the maskil, and the muskal. Hashem is the intellect. He's the one that's doing the thought, and he's the thing that's being thought. So Hashem is a self-thinking thought. It means he's a thought that's aware of himself, and the one that's doing the thought, and the thing that's being thought about, and the thought in Hashem are one. Okay, this is a very important idea. We're not going to go into this. The Rambam actually references this in Yesod HaTorah as well, that Hashem's thought, Hashem is a thought that thinks itself. So if there's any parak where the Rambam actually defines Hashem, it's this one, where he says Hashem is a thought. And again, like I said, it's kedai, it can't be said too much, But this is problematic because there are other places where the Rambam says Hashem cannot be defined. It's also problematic by the Mekubalim, who get very upset by this idea that we can say what Hashem is. They know we cannot say Hashem is. We can't even say that it's intellect. The Maral is very upset about this, and others. But the Rambam seems to say in Aleph Samaches, if you want to know what is God, he's intellect. That's what he is. But he's a certain kind of intellect that it intelligizes itself. Okay? I'm only bringing this up to support this reading of Shemona Perakim, that through perfecting your intellect, by knowing God, you become godly yourself. And the ultimate in being a human is to know Hashem, because if you know Hashem, you are Hashem. That's it. Why? Because since Hashem is a thought, then and you become what you think, so then you could become Hashem. The thing is, you can never know Hashem fully, as Rambam cautions us. You can never know Hashem as he is. Why that's the case is for another time. Now let's read the beginning of, this is going to shock you, let's read the beginning of Chelik Gimel Perek Nubez Namar Nevuch, and this is made famous by the Rama in the first Rama in Shulchan Aruch. The Rambam says, a person's sitting and behavior when he's alone at home is not like his sitting and action and movements and actions when he's in front of a great king. When you're at home among your family and friends, you talk freely, while you'll talk differently if you're in the presence of a king. So if someone chooses to be a perfect human and be a man of God, Ishalakim, he should pay attention to the fact, he should take note of the fact that the great king that's hovering over him is greater than any human being, even David Hashem. Now, please do not jump ahead. Who is this king? I want to take a survey here. Who is the king that the Rambam's talking about? Moshe Mordechai, you're selected to answer this question. Who is the king that hovers over the person constantly?
Wrong answers first.
Huh?
Wrong answers first.
No, yeah, only wrong answers.
Okay. Hashem.
Hashem. Says the Rambam, next line, that king, and of course the Rambam's leading us to think that, obviously. That's the whole point over here, and that's what the Rambam says. But the Rambam says that king that's nilve, that's going along with us and connected to us, is the intellect that flows over us, which is the connection between us and Hashem. So the Rambam deliberately leads us to thinking about Hashem. We're in the presence of a great king. And then he says, you're in the presence of your intellect. So when you say, I have to cover my head because I'm in the presence of Hashem, what are you in the presence of? You're in the presence of reason. And he says further in this paragraph, something very important, that just like we understand Hashem through that light, which is the intellect, so too he sees us through that very same light. So he's saying something interesting over here about the nature of why intellect is the conduit, okay, which we have to think about that to understand this fully. But I want to just touch on this to show you that our hasaga of Hashem, which happens through the medium of the intellect, is what makes us in the presence of Hashem. The Rambam is insisting on that. And being in the presence of Hashem is having a brain. Because intellect is not just a feature of humanity. Intellect is the means by which we know Hashem, and it's also the means through which he sees us. Okay? What does that mean? And through that, he's with us constantly. All these things, and through that, there's hashgacha. All these things have to be understood fully. But I'm just bringing out this idea that to perfect the intellect is to be in the presence of Hashem. Now, one word about the Rama. Okay, so how does the Rama in Shulchan Aruch, just agav, once we're on this, how does the Rama in Shulchan Aruch say that he places a word over here? He says, okay, so you should recognize you're in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why did he do that? Now, it's not untrue, but it's simplifying matters, right? The Rambam makes it very clear that the intellect is the means by which we're in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because our intellect is the same thing that he's using to know us, okay? But just Maimer HaMuzgar, the Rama in Torah Sa'ila, when he's talking about a Gemara in Sanhedrin that talks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu came and shaved Sancheriv, very a strange Gemara. So the Rama gives a few pshatim, and he says, in one of his pshatim, he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a mashal for the seichel. that when Chazal say HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's a code word for seichel. So when it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu came and shaved Sancheir, it means something like it was reasonable for Sancheir to take a shave or something like that. And that's why the Ramah, you're not going to scare your average Shulchan Aruch reader and tell him you're in the presence of your seichel, is in the presence of Hashem, you're going to know what hit him. So he replaced the word with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in line with his idea that when you're talking in codes, because not everyone can understand this, you can replace seichel with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is there is a possibility of uniting with Hashem. This bothers a lot of people, this idea that the Rambam allows for someone to become one with Hashem, and everyone thinks that the Rambam doesn't believe in such things. It's not true, he does. I'm going to show you one other place where he talks about, he says, Avram, Moshe, the Avos and Moshe became one with Hashem. Here it is. His ba'ara, his achdusam im Hashem. These four people, the Avos and Moshe Rabbeinu, they were united with Hashem. So even though the Rambam is the one who teaches us that Hashem is not a guf, and everyone thinks that, like, to say, for example, people think that anyone who says that the neshama is a chelik or kamimal, it's kfira because I'm a Maimonidean and I know that Hashem is not a guf and a human being is not Hashem. Shlusim ba'avolim, it's not true. It's not true that's kfira, that's a Rambam. It's true that the Rambam, because the Rambam himself says that about certain people united with Hashem. Now, you have the same kash on the Rambam. What do you mean united with Hashem? Hashem is not made up of parts. And so on and so forth. And this has to be understood fully. Certainly has to be understood. But the Rambam himself has these lashonis that allow for, if you understand them properly, are certainly not, the Rambam considers them to be important and not kfira, of course. I would say furthermore, just tell you two more points about this. The Rambam in Hilchos Mezuzah says that the only thing that's forever is the knowledge of God. The only thing that's forever is the knowledge of God, says the Rambam. So I have a question. Souls of tzaddikim are forever. After they die, they last forever. The answer is they are the knowledge of God, meaning to say the perfection of the human being is the same knowledge that God has of himself. And therefore, you can say that the only thing that lasts forever is the knowledge of Hashem. And that includes Hashem, because Hashem is the knowledge of himself, as the Rambam says in Aleph Samach. And that includes the people that unite with him through knowing him. Okay, so that'll be all for now about this thing. And now I want to move on to one other Nakuda. Let's spend about 10 more minutes or so. So we learned so far. Yeah, Moshe, you have a question?
I'll wait to that.
Okay, no problem. So what we learned so far? We learned today that a human being is supposed to perfect his intellect and basically become divine, become unintellect, which is basically a mala, if not for Hashem. And okay, and that's the purpose of a human. Now the question then is, so why does he have a body? You might as well die, basically. Once you become an intellect, why? Because remember the Rambam says in Yesod Torah that by perfecting your form and becoming an intellect, you become something that's immortal. Because he says over there, because an intellect doesn't require a body. And therefore, there's no reason, says the Rambam, that the intellect should die along with the body. Which now you understand a little better. The intellect is a divine thing. It's something that exists whether you know it or not. And by you knowing reason, you just connect. You just become part of this reason. But the reason exists forever and ever. So the question then is, why is the Rambam advocating human beings to become angels? Once you're an angel, what do you need a body for? You might as well die. And in fact, Olam Haba is actually very significant to the Rambam for this reason. Meaning to say, why is Olam Haba so? Why does Rambam love Olam Haba so much? In Hakdom Techelik, he's like, no, the schar is not in this world. Schar is not in Mashiach. Schar is not Chias Hamesim. Schar is not Ganeden. Schar is Olam Haba. Why does he love Olam Haba so much? Because Olam Haba, in the Rambam's understanding, is the intellect lasting forever. the reason that you perfected being forever. And that's the ultimate perfection of a human being. So he says in Akdama Techelik, if a person perfects himself, he makes himself into a full human being. He's no longer an animal. And once he's a human being, there's no reason he shouldn't last forever because the soul that knows God lasts forever like God. This has to do with what we just discussed, which is what Olam Haba is. So basically, the purpose of a human being is to die, let's say, and to go to Olam Haba, which is very odd because why is he alive? Right? In other words, people have a problem with the Rambam. Why he basically the Rambam has this idea that the purpose of a human being is to be an angel. Ma'aseh Hashem gave us a go. So there is a lot more to do than just perfect yourself and become an angel. That's the problem people have with the Rambam. And the fact is, the Rambam himself here in the Maravuchim Chilek Gimel Perek Nun Aleph. So he talks about this idea of a person perfecting his intellect and dropping the connection to the body as he gets older. As a person gets older and the koyches haguf are weaker, the seichel gets stronger, the intellect gets stronger, and a person has better understanding and better happiness until he reaches the point that he's such clarity and such an excitement with the knowledge that he has that his soul departs out of pleasure. And that's his definition of misas neshika. So he has this map of the human life, which is that you start off young and you can't perfect your intellect because your intellect is in conflict with the body. As you get older, there's less of a conflict because the body becomes weaker. And then when a person reaches the stage where his intellect is so powerful and his simcha, his happiness and whether his massive becomes so overwhelming that he just remains in that state of being consumed with intellect and happiness with it, and that is the state of Olam Haba, and that is when he dies. So basically, the ultimate stage in a person's life is death, when he leaves behind his body and he can be permanently an angel. And then the question is then why? What about the fact that we're a body? The Ram doesn't tell us what to do with our body, right? He says everything about the body is only there to serve your intellect. So Bekitza Amaisa, why don't we just be angels? And as the Rambam give a model for human behavior, which doesn't involve the body. In other words, so what I'm saying is like this: had the Rambam said in the Shemona Perakim, you know what the purpose of human being is? To make the world a better place. I said, oh, that makes a lot of sense because God put us here. So apparently we have to be masak in the world. But the Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam makes the purpose of human being is to transcend the body and basically become an angel. But we're not. We live in a physical, tangible world. It seems to be very, very strong criticism of the Rambam. But I want to explain to you the answer is like this. The answer is like this. People have a time on the Rambam. People have a time on the Rambam that how could you make a person into an angel when really he's a body? The answer is as follows. The Rambam never wrote a book telling angels what to do. Why did the Rambam write a sefer telling a malach what to do? Yeah? It's a very silly thing to do because the malach, being an intellect, I think we mentioned this. The Rambam says in the Meir that what are angels? The Rambam says this as well. Angels are intellects. Okay? They're ideas, thoughts, reason. You don't tell reason what to do because reason knows what to do. That's the nature of intellect. The Rambam is not here to tell human beings what to do. He's here to tell a human being how to become a human being. Once you're a human being, so now what? So now your reason is absolute. You have powerful reason, which is the ultimate of the reason is to know Hashem. And now you have a question. Okay, so what are you supposed to do with that reason? And the answer to that is, well, whatever reason dictates. Whatever reason dictates that you should do as a body is what you're going to do. So same way, let's say a malach flies around the earth and does all sorts of cool things because he's a malach, meaning to say, because he knows things, because he understands things. Therefore, he acts on them. I'll give you an example. A malach understands chesed as being a good. So therefore, he executes chasadim, okay? And that's why the trees grow, and that's why fruits grow, because there's a malach that makes them grow, and that malach is called chesed. And that malach understands the idea of chesed, and therefore he executes chesed. Okay. So a human being, when he understands whatever he understands, because he underwent the training that Shemona Perakim is taking him through, now he's going to turn around and say, okay, now what can I do with all this understanding? And that's when the fun really starts. But because now he now he can figure out what to do with the fact that he's a malach who has this body at his disposal. But that's not what the Rambam's job is, because the Rambam would no sooner tell a perfected individual what to do more than he would tell a malach what to do. He's only here to help us become what we are, which is a malach, and then our angelicness, whatever, angelness, I'm not sure what the word is, will then dictate to us what to do with that. There's a line in the Moreh Nevuchim, which is an amazing line. This is in Chelik Gimel Perek Nun Beis. I feel like it's one of the most important lines in the Moreh Nevuchim, where he talks about the purpose of the Torah is to make a person aware of Hashem. The purpose of all the actions of the Torah is the mitzvahs, that through repetition of the mitzvahs, the elite people train themselves to be aware of Hashem. So that's, Rambam always talks about the reasons for mitzvahs, but here he gives another reason for the mitzvahs that's for an elite level. People that are capable of it, through repeating the mitzvahs, will be aware of the fact that Hashem, and they'll know who is with them. And we learned already that is intellect. This is an amazing line. The purpose of all the mitzvahs is what? To get a person aware of Hashem, and then he'll do what he has to do. The purpose of the mitzvahs is not that a person should do the mitzvahs. The purpose of the mitzvahs is that a person should be aware of Hashem. Once you're aware of Hashem, what are you going to do then? I don't know. You'll know. Then you'll know what to do. Then I'm not telling you anymore. The Rambam's role is to perfect us so that we become perfect beings who have intellect and reason, and that's when we'll know what to do. So this, then they will do what one should do. This is doing a lot of work. This is doing more work than the whole Shemona Perakim put together, is what I'm trying to say. The Shemona Perakim is telling us how to perfect our intellect. Is that the ultimate of a human being? Well, it's what makes a human being special. Now what? Well, now what? I don't know. Let's see. What does the intellect tell you? What does reason tell you to do? Of course, that's what you're going to do. And clearly Hashem gave this reason, which is you, a very specific job, which is control this body. So just like every malach could have his own job and he'll execute his job as well as he can. So to this malach, which is the seichel, has a job, which is to control this body. So let's say I have a malach. A malach comes to malach school. He wants to learn how to be a malach, right? So what are you going to tell him? How are you going to train him? You're not going to tell him what to do. You're going to train him to be a malach. To be a malach means to be a seichel, to be mizbein in Hashem. Then what? No, then once you know how to do that, be mizbein in Hashem, and then you'll figure out what to do. That's exactly what Rambam's doing with Shemona Perakim. He's not telling us that the ultimate story of a human being is that he's supposed to be an intellect. That is the long-term story, because then he dies and he returns to Hashem and so on and so forth. But the short-term story of this life is that intellect then is supposed to yasu la'achem bikan mashiyesh l'lasis. Okay, and this, I'm going to end with this last point. This is a famous problem in Chelik Gimel Perek Nun Daled, the last parak of the Moreh Nevuchim. Rambam says two completely conflicting things. He contradicts himself, which is, of course, normal in the Moreh Nevuchim, as I mentioned in the past, I think. But we always have to look for the contradictions and understand them. And here he says the following: Shleimus ha'anushis ha'amitis hi hasagas ha'mailas ha'sichlius. He says that the true perfection of a human being is to know truths. Koloimar, to know truths in metaphysics, and that brings you to the metaphysics, means the knowledge of Hashem, and that makes you perfect. Okay, so the perfect thing of a human being is to know truths. And later in the parak, he says, Hatachlis hanizkeres, the pasuk azeh hi shehu hivish shleimus adam sheisbar hi be'emes. What is the shleimus adam sheisbar be'emes? What is the true shleimus that a person should be proud of? To be masig Hashem as much as you can, to know how Hashem is mashgiach, and to act like Hashem. In other words, at one point in this chapter, he says the ultimate human perfection is to know Hashem. And then, and this is the final word in the Moed Buchim, it says the ultimate of a human being is to know Hashem and then to act like Hashem. And this, I maintain, is what's happening. It was the same discussion that we just had. That on the one hand, if you want to talk about the human being, qua human being, in other words, as what he is, how does he perfect himself? Through knowledge. That's what it means to be a perfect human being. But then what? Then after you have this knowledge, you still have a body. So that means you still have work to do with the knowledge. So that's another level. The next level of perfection is when you take that knowledge that you have because you made yourself a perfect human being, and you do something with it. And what you do with it is you're going to act like Hashem does, because you're Masig Hashem, and you're going to do Chesed, Mishpat, and Tzedakah. Okay, we'll leave it at that. I can turn off the recording as soon as you want, or we could have questions on record, whatever you prefer, or neither. Shalom Aleichem Avrami.
Hi, sorry I haven't been around for the last couple of times.
No, you missed some good stuff. You should listen.
I heard. I'm going
okay,
to
so I think I'll shut off the
time
recording.
slot was hard.
I'll stop the recording, right? Unless any questions that should go on record? No, okay, so let me pause the recording and then we can talk if there's anything else. I'll stop.